Before preachers arrived bearing holy books and invaders waving their banners, Africa already pulsed with divine presence. Not one deity, not a few, but countless spirits bound to soil and sky, mountain and river, breeze and flame. They were never distant idols or mute symbols. They lived. Their voices thundered in storms and flickered in the sacred fires of ancestors. Their names resonated across hills and empires, celestial beings shaping human fate, destiny, and faith. Yet now many have faded from memory, buried beneath conquest, erased by colonizers, dismissed by foreign faiths, or left untold. We are made to believe Africa was spiritually empty, awaiting salvation and truth, but that is false. Long before Christianity or Islam reached its shores, African societies held vast and intricate belief systems, some as ancient, profound and organized as those of Greece, Rome, or the earliest known civilizations. From the dense jungles of West Africa to the sands along the Nile, from the shimmering lakes of the Great Rift to the towering peaks of Ethiopia, Africa's gods once reigned supreme. They summoned rain, hurled lightning, cured illness with sacred herbs, and whispered prophecy through dreams. They ruled over life and death, justice and conflict, love and insanity. These divine beings weren't just worshipped, they lived among their people. They guided kings, judged the wicked, and shielded the pure. Their temples existed not for grandeur, but for communion. Their legends were not fables, but living truths echoed through drumbeats and fire-lit chants handed down by elders. Every river possessed a soul. Every mountain bore a sacred name, and ancestors spoke through breezes and murmured winds. Yet as centuries passed, these gods were vilified, reduced or restrained, branded as heathen or savage, torn from their followers by conquest, religion, and deceit. This story is a return to their legacy, to rediscover who they were and what they meant. To understand African spirituality before colonization is not merely to explore history, it is to awaken the continent's soul, to recall the sacred memory of its people and the gods who never departed. In West Africa, the very air hums with unseen presence. Each gust may whisper a secret. Each tree may guard a spirit. Each drumbeat may summon the divine. This land, rich in language and culture, holds one of the most intricate spiritual worlds on earth. It is home to a pantheon of deities who do not dwell in unreachable heavens, but walk among mortals. Here, divinity is not distant. It breathes through the Orisha, the Vodun spirits, the Axum, and the ancestral voices that echo endlessly through generations. Among the Yoruba people of present-day Nigeria, Benin, and Togo, these divine forces are called the Orisha, sacred beings who govern creation and remain in constant communion with humankind. They are far more than symbols. They exist as living forces with distinct temperaments, desires, and realms of power. At the heart of Yoruba cosmology stands Olodumare, the supreme being, the origin of all creation and life. Though distant and not directly worshipped, Olodumare is regarded as the divine architect of everything that exists. The Orisha act as the bridge between humanity and this sacred source. There are countless Orisha, yet a few are renowned across the world for their might and essence. Shango, god of thunder and lightning, embodies unrestrained strength and divine justice, often seen with his blazing double-headed axe. Ocean, goddess of rivers, beauty, love, and fertility, radiates grace yet holds fierce power. Her waters can nurture or destroy. Ogun, the god of iron and warfare, is the celestial blacksmith, guardian of innovation and endurance. Obatala, calm and wise, shapes human forms from the purest clay, bringing life into the world. Each Orisha connects to the forces of nature, linked to specific colors, foods, songs, and rhythms. Their worship is vivid, physical, and deeply personal, sustained through offerings, festivals, trance ceremonies, and sacred music. West of the Yoruba territories in present-day Benin, the Fan people developed a parallel yet distinct belief system known as Vodun. Often misrepresented in the West, Vodun is an intricate network of divine beings and elemental powers rooted in the natural world. Like the Orisha, Vodun spirits dwell within water, fire, earth, and air. Among the most honored are Mawu and Lisa, the divine twins symbolizing the union of feminine and masculine, moon and sun. Mawu embodies gentleness, motherhood, and night's calm embrace, while Lisa radiates strength, light, and the brilliance of day. Together, they created the cosmos. Vodun also honors Legba, the clever gatekeeper and messenger between the spirit and human worlds. No ceremony begins without him, for through Legba all divine communication flows. Then comes Sakpata, the powerful deity of the earth and disease, whose favor brings health, growth, and fertility. Alongside him stands Hevioso, the thunder god of justice and divine punishment. These beings are not mere symbols or ideas. They are living entities. Within Vodun communities, temples are far more than structures. They are sanctuaries where the gods dwell, dream, and communicate. Traveling further along the coast and deeper inland leads us into the spiritual lands of the Akan peoples, found today in Ghana and Ivory Coast. Their belief centers around the Abosom, divine intermediaries who serve under Nyame, the supreme god of the sky. Nyame is infinite, all-knowing, and the source of all sacred energy. Though distant from human affairs, people seek aid through the Abosom, spirits of rivers, forests, fertility, and law, who guide and guard humankind. Among the most revered are Tano, the fierce river god of battle and fairness, and Asaziah, the nurturing earth goddess linked to harvests and the resting place of the dead. Among the Mande peoples, including the Mandinka, Bambara, and Malinke, the understanding of divinity takes on a more mystical and shifting form. Instead of a formal pantheon, Mande spirituality revolves around Nyama, a vital force that flows through all existence. Nyama is not a god, but a cosmic energy that can be shaped through words, songs, ceremonies, and moral conduct. To misuse this sacred power invites chaos, sickness, or madness. The Mande hold deep faith in the presence of jinn and ancestral beings who coexist with the living, shaping fate and harmony. Spiritual mediators such as marabouts or Jeliw griots act as guardians of Nyama, maintaining its balance to protect their communities. Within this grand spiritual network of West Africa also dwell the Igbo people, whose ancient faith, Odinani, acknowledges Chukwu, the supreme creator, the origin of all life, spirit, and reality. Chukwu is immense and infinite beyond human grasp, yet forever tied to every breath of creation. All that lives and moves, from humankind to rainfall to the shadow of death, flows from the divine essence of Chukwu. Yet among the Igbo, the most cherished and frequently invoked spirit is Ala, the goddess of the earth. She is the heart of morality, the guardian of fertility, justice, and the soil itself. Ala is both mother and judge, the one who shelters the dead in her sacred womb. To spill blood, desecrate land, or break sacred law is to wound her spirit, inviting punishment through famine or despair. Each year, the New Yam Festival celebrates her grace, renewing the covenant between people and the living earth. Throughout West Africa, despite countless tongues and traditions, a single rhythm beats, a spiritual bond rooted in nature, kinship, and divine order. These gods are no distant idols. They live among their followers, rewarding purity, condemning greed, and guiding destiny through visions, omens, and ritual. They are creators and destroyers, guardians and lovers, ever watching, ever near. These traditions were never static. They were living flames, pulsing with rhythm, movement, trance, and sacred fire. Even now, though colonization and conversion tried to silence them, the gods of West Africa still whisper through melodies, chants hidden shrines deep in emerald forests, and the golden dust along the Nile beneath vast temples and ancient tombs. The divine powers of North and East Africa once ruled with majesty and mythic beauty, long before pyramids became tourist relics and hieroglyphs museum relics. The people of Kemet, modern Egypt, honored a pantheon mirroring the cosmos, human longing, and the endless cycle of death and rebirth. Their gods were not frozen tales, but living architects shaping law, art, birth, and sunset. At the center of Kemetic faith stood Ma'at, not a goddess of form, but the eternal force of truth, justice, and balance itself. She held the universe together, and both gods and kings bowed to her harmony. When souls perished, their hearts were placed upon her feather to reveal their worth. To exist within Ma'at was to live in sacred harmony, not only by moral law, but in sync with the rhythm of the cosmos itself. Around this truth revolved a pantheon both infinite in power and deeply human. Ra, the radiant sun god, rose each dawn aboard his blazing solar bark, sailing the heavens before descending into the shadowed underworld at dusk to battle Apep, the eternal serpent of chaos. His triumph was never promised, only earned through divine perseverance. Osiris, emerald-skinned ruler of the dead, once governed the living world until slain by his envious brother Set. Through the sacred magic of his wife and sister Isis, he was revived, and together they bore Horus, the falcon-headed warrior destined to avenge his father's fall. These gods reflected the eternal pulse of the Nile, the seasons, and the endless loop of rebirth. Their temples were not merely monuments, but celestial engines aligning earth and eternity. Every inscription, every hymn, every ceremony followed the stars themselves. South of Kemet, across today's Sudanese lands, the legacy continued. The kingdom of Kush thrived with a sacred realm all its own, blending and reimagining Egyptian divinity through a distinctly Nubian lens. During the powerful Napatan and Meroitic eras, the Kushites revered many of Egypt's deities, yet elevated Amun above all, transforming him into a supreme cosmic creator rooted in local tradition. At the temple of Jebel Barkal, their kings were crowned as the divine sons of Amun, binding royal power to celestial purpose. Yet Kushite belief also birthed its own gods. Abrahamic, the lion-headed war deity, symbolized valor, protection, and unrelenting might. Unlike Kemet's more contemplative gods, Abrahamic was visceral, guardian of monarchs, avenger of wrongs. The moon goddess Amisemi, protector of women and the night, embodied gentleness woven with strength. Within this spiritual order, Kushite queens, the Kandakes, ruled not as consorts but as sovereigns, reflecting a theology where feminine power was sacred and sovereign, not secondary. As we journey east into the Horn of Africa, the ancient kingdom of Axum rises, a beacon of trade, culture, and spiritual depth situated in present-day Ethiopia and Eritrea. Centuries before Christianity became the state faith in the 4th century CE, the Axumites followed an indigenous polytheism deeply connected to the natural world, celestial patterns, and royal divinity. Inscriptions from pre-Christian Axum mention deities such as Beher, guardian of the sea, Marim, a war god tied to kingship, and Ashtar, believed to be a local adaptation of the Semitic goddess Astarte or Ishtar. Mahram stood as the divine protector of monarchs and empire, symbolizing sacred authority and military strength. In this region, spirituality and nature were inseparable. Holy groves, mountains, and rivers served as abodes of divine presence. The skies were not merely weather guides, but canvases for divine messages. Czar spirits, ancestral and nature entities, were thought to shape destiny and well-being. These spirits, sometimes kind and sometimes vengeful, were honored through rituals filled with drumming, music, and trance-like dance. Tradition still echoed among Ethiopian and Somali peoples today. Among the Somali people, pre-Islamic spirituality thrived in depth and mystery, though much of it remains only in fragments today. Oral traditions and ancient poems speak of Wak, the great sky god who ruled over the heavens and rain. The worship of Wak once stretched across Cushitic lands of the Horn, long before the arrival of monotheism, symbolizing divine justice, fertility, and protection. Wak was not honored in temples, but through nature itself. Sacred mountains, towering trees, and deep wells served as his sanctuaries. His presence in Somali belief connects to an older East African tradition of a supreme sky deity, a shared spiritual archetype across the continent. Like the ever-changing landscape, from arid plains to green highlands, East African spirituality was never rigid. It flowed, adapted, and evolved. Spirits were said to enter the living, dreams became divine messages, and elders stood as translators between worlds. In Ethiopia, this ancestral essence later intertwined with Christianity, preserving ancient beliefs beneath the surface of holy texts and church ritual. Sacred springs, revered tombs, saintly shrines, and nature-born festivals continued to preserve the pulse of ancient reverence. Together, the gods of Kemet, Kush, Axum, and the Horn weave a legacy of African spirituality that was scientific, regal, and deeply mystical. These were not gods worshipped through blind faith, but beings to be understood, questioned, honored, and invoked. Their spirits moved through the rise of the Nile, the roar of desert winds, and the sacred silence of mountain caves. They ruled through remembrance and in stone, sunlight, and shadow. Though many of their names faded or were reshaped, their essence still lingers in standing temples, surviving rituals, and a cosmic belief that united deity, nature, and soul. If the gods of North and East Africa reigned from carved temples and mythic tales of birth and resurrection, then the spiritual realm of Central and Southern Africa breathed through dust, rhythm, and ancestral flame. Here, the divine was never distant. It lived in family roots, in the crackle of firewood, and in the songs of the living, crackling under the night sky and the rhythmic beat of rain upon parched earth. Across the sprawling lands from the Congo Basin to the southern plains, spirituality was not a rigidly observed religion. It was a way of life, an enduring connection linking the living, the dead, and the invisible forces that shape the world. Among the Zulu of southern Africa, the highest deity is called Unkulunkulu, the greatest of all, who arose from primordial reeds to form the first man and woman. Yet though recognized as the ultimate source of life, Unkulunkulu is not always central to daily devotion. For the Zulu, the Amadlozi, the spirits of ancestors, hold the greatest spiritual significance. These ancestors are not gone. They exist unseen in another realm, constantly observing, guiding, and influencing their descendants. Misfortune, illness, or conflict is often interpreted as ancestral displeasure, signaling the need for acknowledgement, remembrance, or correction. Offerings of beer, meat, or sacred herbs are given not out of fear, but from reverence for the living memory that connects the community across generations. Further north, in present-day South Sudan, the Dinka people honor a supreme god called Nyalik, a sky deity who is both creator and ruler of all existence. Nyalik brought humans, cattle, and the world into being, governing with a blend of distance and closeness. He is approached through prayer and divination, yet much of Dinka's spiritual life revolves around cattle, sacred creatures that serve as both economic resources and spiritual bridges. The Dinka regard each cow as a gift from Nyalik, central to rituals, songs, and social identity. Every cow has a name, a song, and a role within the community. Caring for these animals sustains the Dinka's connection to the divine and expresses gratitude for life itself. In the Congo Kingdom of Central Africa, spiritual practice focused on Nzambi Mungu, the creator who shaped the universe and then withdrew, letting the world operate through a balance of spiritual forces. Unlike Western concepts of a singular omnipresent god, Nzambi Mungu is accompanied by Simbi, lesser spirits tied to nature, water, and ancestral power. Congo cosmology was expressed through the Danga, a sacred cross symbolizing life's cycle, death, and rebirth. Each section of the Danga reflects a stage of life, the soul's journey, and the transition between the material and spiritual worlds. In this circular perception of time, death is not final, but a passage to another existence, where ancestors act as guardians and teachers for the living. West of the Congo Basin, the Lozi people of present-day Zambia and Angola hold beliefs centered on Nyambe, the creator god who formed the earth, sun, animals, and first humans. Nyambe once dwelled among humans, but, tired of their violence and disobedience, withdrew to the heavens to prevent destruction. From there, he observes and listens, rarely intervening. This pattern recurs across African cosmologies. The divine retreats not out of indifference, but to grant humans freedom of choice. Nyambe is venerated, yet spiritual guidance is chiefly sought through intermediaries such as spirits of deceased kings and clan ancestors. The Lozi's Great Kwamboka Festival, involving the royal barge crossing the Zambezi River, serves as both a political celebration and a spiritual enactment, a symbolic journey honoring tradition, rhythm, and sacred authority. Among the San peoples of southern Africa, one of the oldest continuous spiritual traditions in human history, the divine is not separate, but infused throughout the environment. The San, or Bushmen, have lived for tens of thousands of years as hunter-gatherers in the Kalahari Desert, and their spirituality reflects a profound connection to the land. They speak of Shu, pronounced Ku, a high god who created the world and established its patterns. More importantly, they engage in trance-healing dances, ecstatic communal ceremonies where healers enter altered states to cure illness, commune with spirits, and harmonize the group's energy. These rituals are not mere performances. They are sacred labor, a means to reach the invisible, restore balance, and return tension to the spirit world. Across the Bantu-speaking peoples spanning from Cameroon to South Africa, similar beliefs appear. Most revere a supreme being, variously called Mulungu, Nyame, or Lisa depending on the region. This deity is usually seen as distant, a creator who set life in motion but delegated its upkeep to spirits, nature, and ancestors. Ritual specialists, such as Angus or Sangomas, act as mediators, diagnosing spiritual imbalances and providing remedies through herbs, charms, or spirit possession. Divination practices, from casting bones to interpreting dreams, are common tools for understanding the unseen. Illness, infertility, or misfortune is perceived not as random, but as a message from the spiritual realm requiring attention and action. Across regions, one theme unites these traditions: the central role of ancestors in life's continuity after death. Ancestors are more than memory. They actively influence family affairs and destiny. They protect, punish, counsel, and sometimes act through their descendants' dreams. In many Central and Southern African cultures, disrespecting the dead invites calamity, while honoring them brings prosperity, healing, and spiritual balance. These beliefs do not rely on written scripture or grand temples. They are lived through ritual, song, sacrifice, and oral storytelling. They adapted over time, embraced local variations, and moved with the rhythms of the land. They stressed harmony between the seen and unseen, the living and the dead, the human and animal realms. They conveyed a deep truth. The world is alive with presence, and nothing, neither stone nor river nor silence, is devoid of spirit. As colonization and religious conversion advanced, many of these practices were suppressed or dismissed as superstition. Yet they endured, hidden, intertwined with Christian symbols, or preserved in the memories of enslaved peoples. Today, across Central and Southern Africa, these traditions are being rediscovered, honored, and revived as both heritage and truth. When European missionaries arrived on African soil, they brought more than Bibles and rosaries. They carried an agenda that framed African spiritual systems as savage rather than sacred, fear rather than faith. To colonial authorities and Christian evangelists, Africa's gods were seen as barriers to civilization, dangerous and subversive, relics of a people deemed in need of salvation. Conversion was never just theology. It was policy, warfare, and cultural domination. In this process, entire realms of meaning were dismantled. Gods who once governed rivers and guided rulers were recast as demons. Ancestors were branded evil spirits. Sacred drums fell silent. Shrines were destroyed. The ancient ways, forged over thousands of years, were ridiculed as backward and erased from education, law, and history. Yet African spirituality endured. It adapted. It survived. Frequently, it transformed under pressure, taking new forms that concealed the old deities under new names. This process, called syncretism, became a potent instrument of spiritual resistance, a method for enslaved and colonized Africans to safeguard their gods beneath the surface of imposed religions. In the Caribbean and Americas, where millions of Africans were forcibly brought during the transatlantic slave trade, the gods traveled with them, not in temples, but through memory, song, rhythm, and ritual. In Haiti, West African spiritual systems merged with French Catholicism to form Vodun. The Orisha became LWA, divine spirits who possessed their devotees during trance. A Catholic saint could represent a traditional deity. Zulu reflected ocean, while Baron Samedi echoed ancestral death spirits. Catholic altars served as coded maps to divine pantheons that had survived the Middle Passage. Rituals of possession, drumming, offerings, and invocations persisted even under the scrutiny of plantation owners and priests. In Vodou ceremonies, the old world came alive again, with the same gods concealed in plain sight. In Brazil, enslaved Africans developed candomblé, a dynamic spiritual system rooted in Yoruba cosmology, yet shaped by the rhythms of the Atlantic world. The Orisha were venerated through ritual dance, sacred drumming, and elaborately decorated altars. Each Orisha was linked not only to natural elements, but also to specific colors, foods, and Catholic saints. To outsiders, it resembled Catholicism. To practitioners, it was a direct continuation of African divinity. In Cuba, similar processes created Santeria, where the Orisha were again renamed but never forgotten. Shango became Saint Barbara, while Elegua was represented as Saint Anthony. These were not conversions, but survival strategies. Back in Africa, colonial influence also reshaped traditional religion. Missionary schools suppressed African spiritual teachings, often punishing children who observed ancestral rituals. Governments prohibited public ceremonies, criminalized possession rituals, and destroyed sacred groves. The gods were not just marginalized, they were outlawed. Yet the gods persisted, speaking through hidden shrines, midnight songs, and whispered prayers to rivers remaining ever present. African communities continued consulting diviners, honoring ancestors and making offerings. Even as churches rose over villages and European names replaced African ones, some responded by blending traditions, creating African independent churches that combined Christian symbols with indigenous practices. In places like Nigeria, prophets shared visions reminiscent of ancient diviners. Healing, spirit possession, and ritual music all re-emerged in new forms. Movements like the Aladura churches maintained profound links to spiritual heritage while operating within a Christian framework. In South Africa, Zionist churches adopted sacred water rituals, trance healing, and prophetic dreams, central features of African cosmology cloaked in Christian robes. Even among full converts, old spiritual instincts never entirely disappeared. In times of crisis, many still turn to elders and spirits for guidance and support. The ways of their ancestors endured. Illnesses beyond the reach of Western medicine could lead someone back to the shrine. Troubled dreams might summon the wisdom of an oracle. Death was never the end. The departed still walked, observed, and required attention. The bond between the visible and invisible persisted, even if concealed beneath layers of colonial suppression. Today, a revival is underway, a reawakening of African spiritual awareness. Across the continent and diaspora, people are reconnecting with the gods of their forebears. Young Africans are learning the names of Orishas, Abosom, Vodun spirits, and ancestral deities once forbidden. Scholars translate ancient manuscripts, artists revive sacred motifs. Social media serves as a modern stage for digital priests, spiritual educators, and cultural historians. People are reclaiming names, languages, and rites that were once forbidden. This is not nostalgia. It is reclamation. It is spiritual survival, alive not in ruins or relics, but in renewal. Colonization tried to erase African spirituality, yet it only scattered it. Like seeds, these traditions sprouted in the cracks. The gods were never truly absent. They lingered in drums, dreams, and rivers, waiting to return. Now, with every name spoken and every ritual revived, they rise anew, not as echoes of the past, but as living forces today. Their endurance testifies not only to their power, but to the resilience of the African spirit. What does it mean to forget a god? To pass a river without bowing? To gaze at stars without knowing their names? To speak a tongue stripped of its prayers? To bury the dead without the rites that once opened the way? For the ancestors, colonization of Africa was not merely a conquest of land and labor. It was a conquest of spirit. Sacred mountains were replaced by mission schools, ancestral altars by pulpits, and gods who spoke through thunder, dreams, and drums by distant, imported figures. Yet the story does not end there. Africa's gods were never truly gone. Though silenced, they were not erased. They withdrew into memory, into stories, into the private spaces of grandmothers' songs and hidden shrines. They traveled across oceans in the minds of enslaved peoples, taking new names, hiding behind saints and whispering through rituals that were forbidden and mocked. And now they are returning, not with anger, but with remembrance. In the rediscovery of Chukwu and Allah, Oshun and Shango, Nalikan and Zambi, a spiritual renaissance is emerging. It is more than the revival of old gods. It is the restoration of a world where spirit flows through all things, where ancestors walk among the living, and where the earth is seen not as mere resource, but as relative. To recall the gods of Africa is to acknowledge that African civilizations were never spiritually empty before the advent of Islam or Christianity. They were rich with cosmologies, philosophies, rituals, ethics, and profound reverence for life's mysteries. These were not isolated tribal practices, but intricate, interconnected systems of belief that sustained kingdoms, guided agriculture, shaped law, and addressed life's deepest questions. Who are we? Why do we exist? What happens after death? African gods held these questions with wisdom and dignity, woven into stories passed down through generations. Today, as Africa faces modernity, migration, and global identity, remembering the gods becomes an act of grounding, a refusal to let colonization dictate the final chapter of African spirituality. It is a proclamation that Africa's soul was never lost, only hidden. The temples may have vanished, yet the rivers continue to flow. The drums still echo and dreams still arrive. Within these rhythms, the gods await, not for blind worship, but to be recognized anew, engaged with, questioned, honored, and listened to. For some, remembering the gods means reclaiming ancestral rites, relearning ceremonies, and communicating with spirits in sacred groves. For others, it means reinterpreting the divine through African perspectives, composing new poetry, creating music, and constructing altars that merge tradition with the present. It does not demand rejecting other faiths. It simply calls for making space for stolen stories, for deities who once roamed these lands before foreign prophets arrived. This is more than history. It is healing, because to remember the gods is to honor the people, to understand that African identity did not begin with chains or colonization, but in creation myths and cosmic dances, in rituals performed under stars older than any empire. To remember is to restore balance, to remind the world and ourselves that Africa was and remains a continent of spirit, depth, and divine origin. So if this video touched you, if it stirred something ancient within, if it recalled the wisdom whispered by elders, if it inspired you to light a candle for those who came before, then share it, like it, and subscribe. Let us not only learn history, but live it. Let us carry it forward. Let us ensure these gods, ancestors, and sacred truths are never forgotten again. For the gods are not only in the past, they are in the wind, the drum, the silence, and they are listening.